All right, so something that's important to talk about at this point is debugging. Okay, so when you're writing code, and you probably run into it already if you've been following along and trying to kind of write your own version of this in Code Sandbox, you've run into errors. You've seen me run into errors. A couple times I didn't define something, and there was that red line in the dev tools, or something didn't work right, and I had to go back and try to figure out like what was the problem. We call that debugging. Now it's kind of cool. I'm a history nerd, and the origin of that term is actually that in an early computer, like when computers were the size of rooms, it wasn't working properly, and they dug in, and eventually they found there was literally a bug inside the machine that was like preventing like some electrical contact from working, and that's the origin of this term. There's a bug in the software. So that's a really good way to think about it. There's just something that's making it not work, and it should work, and you feel like you did it right, and why isn't it working? Bug fixing can be really, really frustrating, but we're always making mistakes in there, okay? And there's lots of different types of bugs. So I'm going to give you some sense of some common bugs that you're going to run into, and some way to kind of approach this problem of bug fixing. It can be really frustrating and really challenging for programmers at every single level. So for a beginner, you're going to run into a lot of bugs that are around syntax. That stuff we've been talking about, writing things in just the right way. Maybe you put an extra space somewhere and you shouldn't have. Maybe you forgot a semicolon and it shouldn't be there. And these kind of bugs are actually some of the hardest to find because they aren't always obvious. There was one that I had during the course of our work where it said like unexpected end of input. And that's basically saying that I missed a semicolon, or it's basically saying that I missed a curly bracket somewhere along the line. But finding out where that is, if I have a long thing of code, is really challenging. And so there's some helpful tools out there. The beautifying and linting tools that I talked about last time will lots of times help you find those little bugs. Same goes with HTML. You forget to close something, that won't even give you an error message. Things will just look wrong. At least with JavaScript, you get that dev tools console and it tells you when something's wrong. Or with CSS, it might not really make a lot of sense why things aren't working. And so one of the first things to do, especially as a beginner, is go back and look at the code. Maybe use one of those beautifying or linting tools, and they'll lots of times point out, hey, something's not right, maybe it's around this line. And slowly you'll get good at spotting things. And trust me when I say that over time you'll get really good at just seeing these, just like you would see a typo in a paragraph of text, only if you really know English well. Then there's the logic problems. Those are problems that aren't necessarily to do with the way you wrote your code, but to do with like the actual logic that you're using. So for instance, with our app, that's something like that the numbers weren't being added together, they were being concatenated, and we wanted them to actually be added. That's like a logic problem. That's not that we miswrote something, that's that we didn't do it correctly. We didn't parse the integers when we thought we should parse the integers. We were instead just adding strings together. That's a logic problem. And those are getting into slightly more advanced areas, and there's lots of ways to deal with them, but they can be a real mind bender to figure out sometimes. Sometimes it really helps to write things down step by step. Lots of times if you're trying to hold the whole process in your head, it can get really confusing, and that's where you should write little comments to yourself. Something I do a lot and is fairly common is called pseudocode. We basically write out every step that we're going to code before we code it. So for the adding, I might go, it's kind of like what I talked out with you, but we would write it down. You'd go, okay, first I need to make a click. Need to check for a click on an event. Okay, that's one comment line. Okay, now I need to change the value of the text input. Okay, that's another line. And then you write those all out beforehand, and then you just go through and code them. You're like giving yourself an outline. So you're not trying to think of it all on the fly as you're also trying to do syntax. So that's really important too for helping solve logic problems. And doing things like console logging and testing out things, and just, don't think, it's a kind of a joke amongst programmers that sometimes if something works the first time you do it, you don't trust it because it's really normal. The way you wrote it isn't actually the way you want it to work. And I find myself sometimes even blaming the computer, saying that it doesn't make sense that the computer does this. But really, it's just, again, that the computer needs really, really explicit some instructions. And sometimes these languages have weird things going on in them, like that adding and concatenating, that aren't always obvious at first glance. Now, you're going to run into bugs that are just seeming unsolvable to you. You're going to run into logic problems where your mind starts to break and you feel frustrated. You get angry that it's not working. It might sound silly now, but just wait till you start running into it and it feels like this ridiculous thing that you're trying to get to work just won't frickin' work. And when you get like that, it's really important and helpful to develop some good tactics early on, some good habits that, frankly, a lot of top programmers don't have. And that's things like taking a break, go wash your face, go stretch, go for a walk. You'll be amazed how often you are sitting there concentrating on some problem, and then you go out to go for a walk, and 2 or 3 minutes later, as soon as your mind clears, you understand what the issue was, and you're eager to go back and solve it. Learning to take breaks is really important. It's normal to feel really intense and get really zeroed in, especially if you're kind of attuned to being a programmer. You'll really be almost crazy about it. But getting emotional is not helpful. And so if you can, try to separate yourself from that. If you feel yourself getting angry or emotional, step back, put it aside for 5 minutes. You'll be amazed how much quicker you'll actually get it done in the long run. Now, some common issues, again, that you're going to face disorganized code, whether that's your own or other people's. Organizing the code will help a lot to be able to spot the syntax errors and to see clearly what is going on. Naming your variables well will help you identify the logic problems later on, so you're not too confused about that. Same with function names. To have them be descriptive is really, really helpful rather than just function 1, function 2, that sort of thing. Now, one other thing I want to mention that's kind of aside from those, but one you're going to run into, so I need to mention it, is something called a cache, like a browser cache. It's comes from your browser history and that sort of thing. It's part of what lets the internet load things you've already visited really quickly. Well, when we're programming, we're making lots of changes all the time and refreshing the page and change, refresh, change, refresh, change, refresh. And a lot of browsers or programs or different websites and stuff have this thing called a cache built in. And so you'll make a change, you'll reload, and the change won't be there, and you don't even know what's happening. Just so you know, that's a cache, C-A-C-H-E, something to Google if you run into a problem that sounds like this. We're probably not going to run into it in this course, but I really feel like you need to hear it in order to just know that it's out there, because it's going to hit you at some point, I guarantee you. So anyway, that's just a little bit of advice from a longtime programmer about bug fixing and the challenges associated with it. But I know you'll be able to do it, and you'll do it better than me. So yeah, we'll see you in the next video.